My name is Hannah Sheffy, and I have been doing my presentation on the right to be forgotten. So the right to be forgotten is a ruling in the European Union. It is the Article 17 of the General Data Protection Regulation, or GDPR. It will be referred to by just GDPR from here on out. It's just easier. And it requires that any information that a company has stored on an individual must be erased or produced in a timely manner if that person requests it. So if I am a citizen of the European Union and I want to call up Google and say, "Hey, I know you've been collecting my data. I want all of it deleted." They have to delete it without any questions asked in a timely manner. And currently, this only applies to the European Union, but any company that does business within the European Union must abide by it, even if they're not a European Union company. So for Google, they're based out of California or Seattle or the US, but they do business with European citizens, so they have to make sure that they are GDPR compliant. And the right to be forgotten is based on a 1995 ruling in Europe called the Data Protection Directive. And the Data Protection Directive stated that a person could request their data be erased after it was done being used. And GDPR expands upon that by saying that even if the data is still in use, if a person requests that it be deleted, it must be deleted. And this ruling does have limits, and thus it has to be assessed on a case-by-case basis. For example, it's not intended to cover up crimes or hide relevant and important information from the general public. For example, if I stole somebody's credit card and I started making purchases on that credit card, I couldn't call up a company and say, "Hey, I want the records of these purchases to be erased," because that would be covering up a crime. And also, another example would be if somebody has a disparaging article written about them by an online publication, it would have to be determined if that could be deleted upon request, because you could make a case that it is hiding information from the general public that they may need or that they may be entitled to. And GDPR rules apply to any businesses within the European Union, even if they're not based out of the European Union or the data processing doesn't happen in Europe. So any company that works within the European Union or offers services to European citizens must abide by GDPR. The practicality of implementing GDPR is very, very complicated for companies, and they really weren't given that much time to make sure that they were compliant. They had to be compliant by May of 2018. And some people say that there isn't a way to be 100% GDPR compliant, but companies have to try. And becoming compliant requires an entirely new way of looking at and dealing with data on the company's end. Because most companies aren't going to have a way to conveniently look up everything on a person that they have stored and delete it. But that's what they have to do. Now, And it also requires a lot of new training for a lot of their employees, or potentially hiring entirely new employees to deal with GDPR things. So their legal team has to be trained on how to deal with GDPR. Um, they're, and on the tech side, they have to implement brand new features to delete or produce information on an individual, which requires a lot of new training or for employees, or just taking them off of other projects which are also important. And while I think this is a very good ruling, and I think it's going to increase individual liberties, some people do have criticisms of it. For example, it can be used to potentially change history, because while it is evaluated on a case-by-case basis and it's supposed to not hide information from the general public if it's important, it does open up the door for that, because there isn't really a way to determine, okay, this is important, this isn't in every single case. It is very subjective. And so some people could say that it will erase history by hiding information, deleting articles, or hit pieces, or something like that. It's also really expensive because, as I stated earlier, it requires new features, new training for employees. It pulls them off of other work in order to implement GDPR compliance. And it also creates a lot more red tape for companies, which is often um, pushed onto consumers in the form of new terms of service agreements, new ways of dealing with companies. And the violations are not taken lightly within the European Union. They are extremely serious, um, and are resulting in very hefty punishments for violations. Lower violations can result in fines of 10 million euro, or 2% of the company's worldwide annual revenue, whichever one is more. And serious violations can result in fines of 20 million euro, or 4% of the company's worldwide annual revenue, whichever one is more. And when you're dealing with companies like um, Google, Microsoft, Walmart, whatever, 4% of the annual worldwide revenue is a serious number. That is a lot of money. And it has the business world very, very worried. Like, I did an internship over the summer for Walmart, and they were very, very worried. There was a lot of talk about what this was going to mean for the company and how worried people were. Because, as I stated before, a lot of people say there isn't a way to be 100% GDPR compliant. So companies can try their best and have a pretty good, like, be pretty sure that they're GDPR compliant, but you never know when someone's going to find a loophole or when someone's going to find a crack. And so it's very scary to deal with, because companies don't want to get hit with these massive fines. But to give an understanding of how seriously this is being taken, I think it was Marriott bought a smaller company in the European Union, and it turns out this smaller company was not GDPR compliant. And they got hit with one of these fines. Even though they hadn't had the company very long, they were likely working on making them GDPR compliant, but they weren't they weren't yet at the moment. And so they got hit with one of these fines, and it's very, very serious. It's a lot of money. And in the US, there isn't currently a GDPR equivalent, except in California, which has the California Consumer Privacy Act of 2018. which states essentially the same requirements, but it only applies to Californian citizens. But US companies have to still be GDPR compliant when dealing with any data they have concerning European citizens, but not with American citizens. So, in conclusion, with privacy becoming a growing concern for a lot of people now that companies like Facebook are coming out and like people are starting to understand how much data is being collected on them, I think we're going to see a massive push for laws like this to come to the United States and other countries around the world. And here in the US, I think individual states will probably begin passing laws similar to California or GDPR, and eventually some kind of GDPR equivalent will probably be enforced nationwide in the US. Here are my references, and thank you so much for listening.